Welcome to episode 2 of the Veteran to Veteran podcast. My name's Cole, and today's guest we have on a man who is many things. He is a 8-year veteran of the United States Army. He was a sergeant. He was a field artillery cannon crew member throughout his duration in the Army. He is a 20-plus year fireman on 2 different fire departments. He's a father, he's a husband, and he's someone that I look up to and go to with pretty much everything that I have going on in my life. And he's someone I can call a best friend, and that's because he's my dad. And his name's Dave Gillespie. And he was supposed to be the first guest that we had on the show, but the opportunity for Caleb to do an episode with me before he deployed came up, so I wanted to take advantage of that. And Dad got pushed to episode 2. Before we get into the episode, I just wanted to address a few things. One, out of my stupidity, the audio of the first 18 minutes or so is bad. I had the settings on my microphone jacked up. At the 18-minute mark, my phone overheated because we're recording it outside in the sun. It was like a 90-degree day, so my phone overheated. Luckily, because we then relocated to a shady area, and I realized that my audio settings, the microphone settings, were messed up. So we got those fixed. So I apologize. I hope you guys can bear with me and listen to my dad's story up to the 18-minute mark. My voice is going to be much louder than his, and I apologize for that. That's 100% my fault. And again, hopefully that shouldn't be an issue going forward. But from the 18-minute mark on, throughout the rest of the hour and a half, everything's perfect. Like the little bit that I watched through, everything is perfect. It's exactly how I want it to be, and I'm happy to see the result that is coming of these few trial and errors that we're doing right now. And then there were some jump cuts later on in the video, and that's Dad had requested that we omit or redact him naming the 2 fire departments that he works on, one of which I also work on. But he just didn't feel that he didn't want to represent the department in anything less than in a completely professional manner, and drinking beers and cussing and telling stories and stuff. He didn't feel like that was the most professional way to represent his departments that he works for, so he asked that we just take those out. So I did, out of respect to him and to both the departments that he works on. So I just wanted to mention that. And yeah, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Please spread the message. Share this video around. Share this video to people, but also spread the message and trying to build a momentum behind this project that I'm doing and getting more guests on here. And if you haven't, check out last week's episode with my buddy Caleb, and look for what will probably be next week's episode with my stepdad Brad, who's a Navy veteran. But yeah, this week it's all about my dad, Dave Gillespie, and I hope you guys enjoy his story. Thanks for watching. All right, here we are, episode 2, Veteran to Veteran podcast with my dad. He's supposed to be episode 1's guest, but then it didn't. The opportunity presented itself to sit down with Caleb, so I wanted to knock that out. But here we are, and I've actually been planning on sitting down and talking to you about interviewing you anyways, just the vet thing aside. But I guess for all the listeners, we're just going to assume that nobody knows any of this stuff because it's not just the family, so a lot of this stuff is going to be kind of redundant. I'm going to know it. A lot of the family members are going to know it, but for everybody else who doesn't know it that might listen to it, if you just want to talk about a quick background, like everything that led up to the military and what kind of led you to joining the military, and what I kind of asked Caleb too was family members that you looked up to that were military and how much of that inspired you to joining and what you wanted to do, and yeah, just everything about your mindset going into it.
Well, I would say it's kind of extensive, really, because youngest of 5 kids, most of which were all grown and gone by the time I came around, and I'm not sure the impact that might have had as far as service goes, but I think it did in a way because you're grandparents. My parents got to spend a little more time, I think, maybe talking about a lot of those things. In particular, your grandma, and she was always as big of a patriot as anyone. But talking about her pop is what she referred to him as, which in fact was her stepfather. He's still my grandpa, but his service in World War II, and we were reminded of his service every time we saw him because he was combat wounded, had lost his left arm in the Pacific, fighting the Japanese, I believe, in 1943. So his story, what he went through, as well as your grandpa's brother, my Uncle Jack, Army veteran, combat medic during the Korean War, was with a line infantry unit, saw a lot of action, and he was one of the guys that he was a jovial, always very happy guy, always smiling, and he would talk about it, but he wouldn't talk about probably a lot of the things that combat vets wouldn't talk about. I mean, he would selectively talk about some of his, what he probably referred to as more pleasant experiences, but still he talked about it. And he had some really cool stories. Then your grandma's brother, Uncle Steve, all of her brothers, Uncle Steve, Uncle Bob, Uncle Leroy. You got two Army guys and an Air Force vet. Uncle Steve was Vietnam, first Cav, was wounded over there and came back. So, I mean, everywhere I turn, not even mentioning my oldest brother, your Uncle Mark, Air Force guy, and I was young when he joined, but I just remember those. It was like all over, so it was always around me as a kid growing up, and it always intrigued me, always fascinated me. I just had I don't know, I just kind of turned to it as, it was like a hobby as a little kid. I mean, you say play Army, I played some serious effing Army. I went as far as starting a local group of kids. We called ourselves the Renegades, and that was our club. We had a club, and that's what it was for, was to play Army. And we were serious about it. So, I had a chance to join ROTC in high school, Army ROTC, when I moved to Florida, and then it only continued because I was blessed to have the leadership, which were retired Army. I had a retired major, Vietnam vet, helicopter pilot. Done a couple tours over there, Major Couture. And then we had a lieutenant colonel, retired Army, Colonel Timberlake. And he was an infantry commander during his time in the Army, paratrooper, and was a young second lieutenant when he jumped into Normandy with the 101st Airborne Division. And but the guy that really stands at the forefront when it comes to those outside family influences was our NCOIC. And he was a 30-plus year Army infantry airborne first sergeant. His name was First Sergeant Williams. And my good friend Shannon Rhodes, he and I both were with the ROTC there at high school, Cypress Lake High School in Fort Myers, Florida. And First Sergeant Williams meant a lot to us because he set the standard to us on what it was to be a soldier. And he was a young private and dropped into Normandy as a young paratrooper with the 101st Airborne Division. So, what better examples can you have than that? But just wrapping all that into a nutshell, and I couldn't wait, and I mean that with every fabric in my soul. I couldn't wait till I had a chance to do my part. So.
Well, you told me about that. What was it, one fellow student that had graduated and gone on, become a paratrooper and came back to visit.
Yeah.
And even that one guy, I don't even know if you remember what his name is, but just seeing his maroon beret and his jump wings and jump boots, and that having a huge impact on you and Shannon as well.
Huge, yeah. His name was Troy Morgan. He was a grade or two ahead of Shannon and I, and he was in the upper echelon of the JROTC leadership there at Cyprus, and had left and had joined the Army as a paratrooper. And I remember him coming back. and
Was he
walking in the
infantry as well?
classroom. Yeah, and wearing
So
that,
blue cord and
the bloused boots with the. He was just an E3, but I mean.
you
to
guys
us,
like a god among.
Oh yeah. I mean, when they said he was coming back to pay us a visit, and I just remember him walking in the classroom and jaws were dropped, and it was like, wow. Because, we trained with him, learned a lot of stuff with him when he was still a student there, and to see his transformation from
Now he's the real deal.
now he's the real thing. And he was cherry,
Yeah.
but he still made it. And he didn't make himself out to be some super stud or anything, but we could tell that there was a change. So it was cool.
I think a lot of that stuff is just the visual.
A lot of visual. That's what's great about the military, though. For those like us, sometimes that drives you a little more. Not that you're going for the awards, but the skill badges and everybody wants to look good in uniform.
Yeah.
Come on. Well, not everybody. Some guys can give a shit, but I always wanted to.
Also, leading up to your decision to join the military, I mean, I know that you went Army ultimately, but was there ever an inclination to go to any other branches, and what kind of steered you toward the Army? And then what MOS were you looking at, and what were your kind of initial goals? Also understanding that a lot of your initial goals when you're going through the enlistment process are kind of naive, but what were you trying to get out of the Army itself?
I talked to the Marine Corps. I maybe considered a little bit speaking to the Air Force, but some of the things I've already mentioned, the playing the Army and being part of the Army JROTC program and doing the Explorer stuff, which was a lot of just straight infantry. It was all combat arms type of stuff. By the time I was a teenager and through high school, my decision had been made to pretty much I wanted to be a combat soldier. So my options then were Army or Marine Corps. And without going off on a side note, Bar, and getting off subject here, I had mentioned that I couldn't wait to do my part. So I hated school, and as a dad, I have to be kind of the hypocrite, because as much as I hated school and wanted out of it, I pressed on you and Jake and Allie. I still do that. It's very important, obviously, to get your education, but I was a huge pain in the ass to my parents, and I wanted out, and I wanted out in a bad way, meaning out of school. So I conned your grandmother into signing for me at 17, and I left halfway through my junior year and enlisted. But kind of jumping back, I'd spoken to the Marine Corps, but that was the one thing that kept me from really going any further with them. I remember the recruiter saying, "We don't take GEDs around here. You have to have a high school diploma. You get your high school diploma and you come talk to me."
So for you, it was just the fastest route to becoming a combat soldier.
I thought, let's get past all the red tape. Once I get in, I can prove myself. So I thought, okay. So I had kind of befriended some recruiters at the Army station down here in Anderson, and those guys at first, I think, thought it was kind of cute that I was coming in. I was supposed to have been in my junior year of high school, and they were encouraging and things. You should get your diploma. But I knew that they would take GEDs, and I thought, well, I can get my GED. That's no problem. Well, I even pushed it more and befriended these guys, I guess, enough to where I got them to admit, now granted this was the summer of 1987, but that I could in fact be enlisted with a waiver without a GED. So I'm sure that those guys, I'm sure they're long since retired, but After a lot of pestering and just me going in and almost begging and pleading, one day I showed up and there were 3 or 4 of them that set me down, and they said, look, here's the deal. You've kind of proven to us by your insistence and you being here literally every day for the last however many weeks that this is something you really want to do. So we can get you in without a GED, but you have to promise us as a man, not as a future soldier, but as a man, all of us looking at you in the eye, that when you get through all your training, that's what you're going to do. When you get to your first duty assignment, you're going to go to the education center and you're going to get your GED or your diploma, because they offer both. And I wanted it anyway. I just wanted to kind of reverse the goals. You know, I wanted to get in the Army first, and then I'll worry about that. So I agreed, and they took it from there. So, but to some of your other questions, I mean, to me it was only infantry. I wanted to be a paratrooper so bad I could taste it, type of thing. You know? So to me that was the essence of a soldier, and especially after seeing Troy, having Colonel Timberlake, having First Sergeant Williams, those huge influences. Uncle Leroy was with the 82nd Airborne. You know, he was a paratrooper. I mean, I thought that was kind of the essence of the Army. If you wanted to be a combat soldier, which I did, then hands down, not that there was anything to take away from the other branches, because they all are cool, but you were going to jump out of airplanes, first and foremost. And second, you were going to be a rifleman. So when I started the recruiting process, I took the ASVAB, scored well enough to do all that stuff, but when I went to MEPS, because of my impatience and my insistence on getting in as fast as I could, now that I knew I had the green light, that's where I kind of messed up a little bit. Was, if that's really what I wanted, was airborne and infantry, I should have waited a little bit, looking back, because I just took what they threw on the plate, and that was leg field artillery.
It's pretty much infantry.
Yeah, you know.
That's how they try to spin it to a guy that wants infantry.
Sure. And, you know, in the recruiters' way they were, maybe are still to some degree, I bought in on the, hey man, you can get the airborne contract when you arrive at Fort Sill. You tell them there that you want airborne, and then they'll hook you up. So one might ask, well, with all these military influences in your life, why didn't one of them tell you that you are getting effed? But you know, your grandpa didn't serve. He didn't really know what was going on. I mean, he would have. He was actually drafted to the Korean War, but because of having kids and stuff already, he was able to opt out. And those other influences just weren't around. So I just took it upon myself to do all the research and go with my gut. But, you know, looking back, I don't regret going that route. I just wish things would have happened a little differently, so I could have had the experiences that I really hoped for. But even though, and you may get to this later, but even though I eventually got orders for jump school, that still didn't pan out.
Right.
You know, so it was like I had 2 opportunities, neither of which.
Okay. All right. So recovering from some technical difficulties. Hopefully Dad is more clear on the microphone. I had to change one of the settings. That was just my stupidity.
Yeah.
And then the phone overheating, because we're doing this outside, obviously, and it was in the sun. So we relocated to a more shady area. So hopefully this works out better, and we can get this thing knocked out. So we had just finished talking about how Dad had kind of had his first opportunity of 2 opportunities in the Army to go to airborne school, and that he was told that at Fort Sill, once he got to basic, that he'd be able to get airborne school, which sure, as we'll cover, did not pan out. So what so now that we're kind of getting into your Army experience, we're getting into your initial enlistment. We kind of talked about what you're looking for, what you're trying to gain out of it, but what would you say I'll hit you with a few questions here. Your overall experience, your biggest lessons learned, and then if you want to talk about, like, for any person out there that might be considering becoming a what was it, a 13 Bravo or field artillery cannon crew member.
Correct.
A day in the life of a field artillery cannon crew member, and then your best memory that you have and your worst memory. So I hit you with a lot of stuff there.
Yeah.
But your overall experience, lessons learned, and then a day in the life.
Okay, so whether it's the aging process or just the fact that I consider myself semi-retired, help me out here. What was part one?
Just your overall experience for your first enlistment.
The Army was everything I ever wanted it or hoped it would be. The indoctrination part at basic, of course, there was some eye-openers there, and that was at a time, I think, when the Army could still put their hands on you, because whether they could or not, they did. And but I saw, especially now, I see value to that as long as it's under control. But that was just a very short second in my time in service. But once you get over the shock factor and you become part of the system, some guys get it, they like it, others don't, and they can't wait to get out. To summarize it, I loved the Army. It was everything I ever wanted it to be for me. And in some ways, everybody looks forward to the day they get out, whether you're retiring or you're just doing 1 or 2 enlistments. But the day I got out was kind of a sad day for me in some ways, because I felt like there was a lot more I could have done. But with the hand that I had been dealt through fate, being a believer in fate, I felt like I was just being led down another path. But I wouldn't for a second consider, if I had a chance to do anything over, I wouldn't have done anything over. I'd still gone Army, still gone combat arms, still done all those things I did, with the exception of jump school. But it's hard to look back at things knowing what you have now, and my life I've been blessed. It's been a great one so far, and I would reluctantly, I guess I would wonder how things would go, but if given the actual opportunity, I'm not sure I would change anything, because I would be fearful that things wouldn't be the way they are now. So what's part 2?
It's a good answer. You kind of hit two of the questions that I was asking. What would you say for some young guy, like, say, Jake, as he's looking at, maybe he's considering field artillery, what would you say a day in the life of a cannon crew member is? Not necessarily out in the field, maybe you could talk about out in the field, but in garrison life as well.
Well, probably not much different than life would be today in the Army. When you're in garrison, everything's about preparation. Preparation. So I don't really even think it probably matters where you're stationed, whether it's stateside, CONUS, or in my case it was USAR, United States Army Europe. At the end of the Cold War, everything was about preparation, and it was preparation to do our jobs in battle. So a day in garrison was getting up, doing PT, going to the mess hall. You have your second formation of the day, which is your first formal formation that sets off your day, and basically being told what needed to be accomplished that day by the first sergeant. And we would break off, and it always involved some kind of maintenance or training, and that was it. It was maintenance and training with our weapon systems, with the gun. And I say gun because back then only artillerymen could refer to any kind of weapon as a gun. Everything else was a rifle or a weapon. So when somebody said, hey, we need to go down to the gun line, or we need to do this with the gun, you knew they meant the howitzer, our piece. And
what was the actual piece that you were on?
It was an M110 Alpha 2 self-propelled howitzer, which more affectionately known as the 8-inch. So it's a gun that has been long gone in regards to field artillery pieces in the United States Army, but then it was one of four, and starting with the little 1.0 deuce, which was a little pop gun, and it was typically used by light infantry or airborne air assault units. Then it jumped up to the 1.9 The 1.0 deuce was a 105 millimeter. Just giving you a quick lesson. The 1.9 was a 155, and then you got in, that was a toad as well. Then you got in self-propelled 109, which is 155, and then the big 8-inch. And the 8-inch had been around a while. It just had some modifications with the muzzle brake and things like that. But you know, most of those crews have a crew of 8 to 10 guys, and it's all about seniority. Who's been there the longest? You know, E4. We had the E4 Mafia back then too, so it's been around a while. But you know, I was blessed to be put in the section I was in because the guy that led the section was a hard driver, man. He was a 26-year-old E6, missing a tooth, hockey player, maybe Sergeant Pfaff's watching this, I don't know, but from Flint, Michigan, and he was as professional of a soldier as there was, and he was the epitome of what it was to be a field artilleryman. I talk about my desire to be infantry. I think this guy probably at 3 years old is having dreams of firing howitzers into, you know, direct fire into enemy tanks or something. I don't know, but he was a great leader, but he was hard. He was old Army, old school, got in your fucking face, you mother, you know, this and that. And for a 17-year-old private, you know, I thought when I got out of basic and AIT, I was past all that. No way. But, you know, I learned a lot. I learned how to be a good soldier. I learned how to be a good artilleryman under his tutorship. And so it was good stuff. But that's what we did. So, you know, it was day in and day out preparation, cleaning, clean this, clean that.
Training,
getting
ready for training.
Yeah. So, you know, but talking to a young kid today going into the field artillery, I would caution them because there is so much maintenance involved, and I think regardless of whether you're self-propelled or towed, that a lot of guys don't realize that. You know, they go in with these grand illusions of, I'm just going to get to shoot shit and blow stuff up, and, you know, all the things they show you in the 2-minute video.
Right.
And
a 2-minute video is a picture of like 0.1% of your entire life. Like 99%. I think that's for every MOS too. It's just 99% of your time is spent doing tedious, monotonous stuff.
Right.
Sitting around a lot of times doing nothing, and then 1% of the time makes up for that other 99% of the time we were like, I'm doing some cool shit right now.
Exactly.
It's just the highest highs and the lowest lows.
Yeah.
And that kind of is a nice little segue into that last little piece of that question of, if you had to pick, maybe I should have asked you this before so you could ponder it, but your most fond memory and your most miserable experience in the field artillery.
Well, let me finish what I was getting ready to say real quick, and we'll go right into that. What I would tell a kid today would be, if you're really wanting to get into 13 Bravo especially, just be prepared to work, and it's not all glory. When you do get to shoot missions and stuff, it's fun as hell, but there's a lot more to it, like you were saying, than that. And you don't get to see, the one downside I never did enjoy was all the firing and training we did. You never get to see what it is you're actually shooting at.
So you don't product of the work.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you're told target destroyed and all this stuff, and you can imagine you can imagine what it was like on the other side, which I'm sure wasn't pleasant. You know, and on that note, you know, we're told from day one, you're the king of battle, and there's a reason for that. Well, even that is in our minds, our imagination, because we're not seeing what complete destruction, death, and mayhem we are creating on the receiving end.
They just say like fire mission complete, and you're just knuckle bumping
Oh,
buddies
yeah.
like, yeah, I bet we messed some stuff up.
Oh, exactly. Yeah,
But you don't actually know
exactly.
what happened.
The only time you know that is when you go to the direct fire range, and we had to qualify twice a year, I believe, to know how to drop your tube and go from indirect fire to direct fire, where you're actually shooting at enemy personnel in your AO, area of operation.
With a
So-
with a projectile that is meant to travel miles.
Right. So it's like sending a steel fist through a paper sack, you know. But
That'd be awesome to
yeah.
see.
It was fun because it was pretty intense because you had to qualify. Every crew had to qualify. You had to hit a moving target and a still target, you know, at a certain range, and you had to do it pretty quick. So, but that would be my advice. Just realize exactly what it is you're going to get into. But so remind me one more time.
Best and worst.
Best and worst. I don't know. There was probably a lot of best moments. I think I was one of those vain guys. I admit. You know, I took a lot of pride just in wearing the uniform. I guess the best moments for me were looking in the mirror every day, as cheesy as this may sound, and saying, "I'm a fucking soldier."
You just sounds like you're one of those guys that just bought it like hook, line, and sinker. You were
yeah.
just being a soldier.
Yeah, I loved, and maybe, you know, I've always felt like I was maybe a little wiser beyond my years in some regards, being around so many older people growing up, but I realized that I was very young. I was reminded of that every day by other soldiers, and I just realized that, man, I'm already a soldier. And I'm not playing Army anymore, and I'm not in ROTC anymore. I'm it, you know. And so those every day, just getting to wake up and do all the things that soldiers do, I ate it up. Those were always, I just kind of soaked that up all the time. I always tried to look around and appreciate that. And then, you know, the bad stuff is, I was blessed to be in the Army during peacetime. You know, so I say this with the utmost respect to those that have served since me in the last 20 plus years, that have seen a lot of crazy shit. You know, the worst times for me was just in our own elements of training, and, you know, the things that we all go through in the sense of cold and wet and all the physical discomforts that we experience when we're in service. You know, and the reason I said the other is because I can't imagine, you know, losing friends and those kinds of things. So I can't really compare, you know, that to wartime Army, but
Well, but this whole thing is about your story, so it's
yeah,
purely subjective. So
it is. But I try to keep it in perspective, because
a lot of guys, their perspective, and nowadays, is that we as a wartime military are blessed that we got to be a wartime military, because
I think so.
like in
yeah.
your day, you know, the only guys walking around with deployment patches were like Vietnam dudes, senior enlisted and
yeah.
senior ranking
I
officer.
saw a few guys walking around. I mean, yeah, you're right. Most of them were Vietnam era, those that were walking around with what we call them combat patches. And then when you got into, you know, 83, you got into some of the Grenada guys, but there weren't very many of them. But and then while I was in, Panama went down, Operation Just Cause, and me having wanted to be a paratrooper for so many years, that was kind of,
I'd say like that's the thing that you reference the most to me. I'm sure like you told me a lot of your like more miserable stories that we now can look back on fondly. You know, I remember you telling me the story where the ground was solid ice and you're trying to drive that was it that rod or whatever, the camo net stake,
the net stakes, yeah.
and that you couldn't do that. But yeah, so there's other stories out there getting smacked in the face at basic training. But maybe it was the moment that you realized that you weren't you had gotten airborne orders.
Oh, yeah.
So your morale had peaked. So maybe as far as from the moment that your morale had dropped the lowest, it was probably at that moment, I think, from all the stories you told me, just because your morale was so high that you were finally getting to go to airborne school just to be crushed.
Right.
And find out that you're not actually going.
It was horrible. I mean, I guess that would probably be the worst experience for me because, by the time I was 20, not even 20, I was E4 promotable when I was still 19. And then I had just gotten orders for jump school because I had put in for it and was one of just a couple guys that got approved and knew I was going to probably end up at the 82nd and was getting ready to re-enlist. And so I had my E5 coming. I was going to be a 20-year-old E5, with jump wings going to the 82nd Airborne. And I was pumped. I thought, I'm a lifer, Not to mention I was told I was a lifer by the senior NCOs, Gillespie's a lifer. And, so, but then this sudden change happened in the MOS, in the Army, in the field artillery, where the point system went from like 670, and right when I got back I went to the board, went to PLDC, and was almost a sure shoe-in for promotion. A month later, it shoots up to 999. And I think I had like around 760 points or something like that. So had I gotten through all that stuff just a couple months prior, I would have been promoted pretty quick. But then I had orders for jump school, and then come August of 1990, we were in the field and doing our thing, and suddenly the news started getting passed around that this nutcase in Iraq had just invaded Kuwait. And we thought, okay, because there was shit going on in the world all the time, but then we heard that elements of the 82nd Airborne Division had just been put on full alert and were about to be sent across the pond. And I didn't think anything of it until word got spread a couple weeks later that all schools, including jump school, had been indefinitely suspended. So if you had orders to anything, that you were probably pretty well screwed. So that's what happened, and I never got my 5, and while I was active, and then jump school was a dream, and the orders never got renewed or anything. So I knew I was going to have to go through the whole process again, and I just wasn't up for it.
It was almost like that was the moment. Like, how far would you say that was from the time that you found out that you weren't getting promoted to the time that your orders for airborne school were canceled?
Probably within 3 or 4 months.
So it's probably like you went from being committed lifer, this optimistic outlook, to I'm getting out.
Yeah, because I had
given everything to the Army, and then they
Yep.
haven't given me anything that I asked for in return.
I felt like I'd done everything that was asked of me, and the Army is the Army. That's the big Army. There is no empathy. The Army is without emotion. It has a job to do, and you got to check your emotions at the door. But still, there's that part of us as humans, I think, that how hard you work towards stuff and how much you want something, and when it's not, especially when it's almost like they're asking for volunteers, and you're the guy in the back jumping up and down going, pick me, I want to do that.
And then they pick the guy that doesn't want to do it.
Yeah, and then they force the kid that just walked in the office he just wanted to be a cook, but now he's jumping out of airplanes and doing all the shit that I want, so it's, in that regard, I was just kind of like, I got to be more Army-like and without emotion and walk away. So
then you transition into the Guard.
Yep.
What was this? Was this 80 or 91, 92?
Yeah, so I enlisted October of 87, and I ETS'd in August of 91, just a month and a half shy of 4 years. Excuse me. And went on. Well, I enjoyed civilian life for a year or so, and then found a field artillery unit in Noblesville, Indiana, that is no longer there. and enlisted for the duration of my 8-year obligation, and was pinned E5 just a couple of months before my ETS. So I at least got that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what would you say your biggest lessons that the Army taught you in your, 8 years total time in service?
Mm-hmm.
Biggest lessons, or what kind of impact did it leave on your life?
Probably one of the biggest ones is, in life, it's not so much what happens to you as how you react to it. And you could, as a kid full of emotion and I think a pretty heavy drive for 17, I had a temper, and I, like a lot of kids, a lot of things that went unchecked. I mean, I was raised right and all that, but now that I was kind of on my own, I quickly realized that if I could harness those emotions, then I was much better off as things came down the path, especially the unexpected things that were dealt to you or dealt to me, that I could have my moment and like be upset about something. But if I kind of screwed my head on right and tight and got focused, I could quickly fix something that otherwise, had I looked at it in any other way, it would have just remained a problem, if that makes sense. So, and it's just a life lesson thing altogether. I mean, it went from, in that world, driving down a dusty tank trail at 2:30 in the morning in Grafenwehr, Germany in 1989, and all of a sudden, your track breaks, and you're going to a new gun position. Now you're left out on a deserted tank trail because the rest of the platoon is continuing on to its mission, and now you're left with 7 other dudes trying to fix a broken track on a 32-ton field piece out in the middle of nowhere, and there's light and noise discipline going on, and it requires both light and noise to fix the problem. But just getting focused on that and not, what the, and losing your shit like a civilian would probably do, and having to fix it. You couldn't sit around and mope. The expectation was you were going to get that stuff fixed, and you were going to be right there with your platoon ASAP. So that's just one example, but that was probably the single biggest thing, and just leadership. The leadership that you learn from both good and bad leaders in the Army is phenomenal. It's a great teacher, because there are really good leaders and there are really awful leaders.
You learn just as much from the bad ones as you do the good ones.
Oh, big time.
If not more.
Time. Yep. But, having said that, I would say that there were things that then I remember thinking, I will never do that. When I'm a leader, I will never do that. And now I find myself doing it, because since then I have learned that through their wisdom and through their experience, they found that even though to a young private that wasn't going to be the feel-good way, but it has an effectiveness on accomplishing a mission. Because as you know, like we've already talked about, the Army has no empathy. One of the Army's sayings for years has always been, mission first, people always. Well, they don't tell you that the people part has nothing to do with your emotions. It's about your needs, because there's needs and wants, and there's that whole conversation. But the most important part of that phrase is mission first. Mission first. So, especially when it comes to the survival of a nation, you got to think about what is its first job. And it is the survival of these United States of America. And the Army, will do anything at all costs to the last man to see that it survives another day, another year, another decade, another century, hopefully to its first millennial. So you got to keep it in context when it comes to why it is. Some shit just never going to make sense. But
It's hard when you're that like young E2 or something to
yeah,
kind of open your eyes to the bigger picture. And I remember even when I was brand new calling you about they're doing this and this shit sucks, and
I'm
you
like,
know, like talk me off the ledge. I'm like 18 or whatever, 19, and
But see, even those bad experiences, those so-called bad experiences, had an effect. I think a positive effect on you.
oh yeah, I feel like I made it into the Army right before, because every generation of the Army is softer than the last.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't put hands on us when we got there, but now, like I can comfortably say that I was hazed
Yeah.
to a high degree, and then to my understanding, that's not even a thing anymore. So it's like the next generation has already started where there is no smoking or hazing, at least nearly as much as there was when I first came in. But I'm like proud of the fact that I got to be part of that before it disappeared. I feel like I earned my way more than the people that are coming in now did.
Yeah.
And yeah, now and you get to look back fondly and laugh about those stories with your buddies about the most miserable times of your life, because the deepest bonds. What is that saying? The deepest bonds are formed through misery,
Mm-hmm.
shared suffering.
Well, and the one I've seen here more lately, I would rather suffer in the company of, help me out here, honorable men than lounge with, what is it, soft men or something like that. It's paraphrasing,
Yeah.
but it's
The point is there.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel that way, absolutely. Because I can't imagine my life not having experienced that. I wouldn't be where I'm at now. I mean, it's not that, I'm wealthy and live on an estate or anything like that, but I mean, I think my life would be different in a lot of ways, especially the self-discipline part and keeping things in perspective, that it could always be worse. Because back here, you think of all those moments where you were, whether it was literally 2 feet of mud in a November rain in, Europe, and you're sitting there with your buddy, and you're both looking at each other going, what in the fuck did I do? But appreciating that, for what it was worth and what we did learn out of it. So
Yeah, now we can laugh about it as
And
we're
now we
sitting
can
here on a
laugh.
sunny day
that's right.
having beers.
That's right. But my claim to fame is the current Sergeant Major of the Army is a classmate of mine, if you will, from Delta 3rd Battalion, 321st Field Artillery, Fort Sill, Oklahoma. We graduated together on February 10th of 1988. He went his way, I went mine. He probably doesn't remember me, but he was in a different platoon. But shout out to you, Sergeant Major. Good job. Way to represent.
You always talk about if you're still in, you'd be a sergeant major by now, and then you see one of your classmates is now the sergeant major
Yeah,
of the
man,
freaking Army.
That's cool. I think it's awesome. Great for him. He was a stud back then, even going through OSIT, so I'm not surprised.
Well, if you want to talk about, now we're kind of steering away from the Army stuff and just talk about as much as you want to talk about just your life now, like what you've done since then to where you're at now, and then we'll go from there and kind of close it up after that.
Okay. Well,
It's a very,
yeah.
very,
Yeah, well, a lot of time has
wide
passed since then, because I did my active and guard time and finished my 8-year obligation in 1995, and basically haven't looked back. I've tried different jobs off and on, and trying to find my niche, so to speak. And I was probably about 25. It's probably right around 1995. I had always had a thing for the American Fire Service. I've always been a history buff and had considered being a history teacher or something along those lines, or maybe looking into this fire thing, because I had a couple guys I looked up to that were friends of relatives that were firemen here in town in Anderson, Indiana. And there was something about it, man, walking in a firehouse and smelling the gear and they'd been on some jobs, in the recent past, and seeing the dirty gear sitting next to the truck and just knowing it was the essence of a blue collar job, and it meant something. And after being a red leg for 4 years or 6 or whatever it was total, blue collar dirty work was right down my lane. So, and I knew I could make a decent living at it, and along with what other else I wanted to do, so I pursued it and ended up getting a full-time gig and also a non-career fire job I've been with longer, and it's just been my passion of my life for over 20, almost 22 years now. So
was it just the other day you hit 20?
Yeah, just 2 days ago I hit 20 years on my career job, so I earned my pension. Yeah. So watch out, mothers, when I come back. There might be a slightly different attitude.
You're enjoying your vacation and growing your beard
That's
out.
right. Yeah, I've been on vacation a couple weeks, so I've got to enjoy yeah. But yeah, that's what I'm doing, and been married a couple times. One time was in the Army, lost a marriage over there. But so goes life and the lessons. I like what I heard somebody say not long ago, and I think it was actually on a Jocko podcast where somebody put it in perspective that I get to do something. It's not that I have to do this, I have to take out the trash. No, I get to take out the trash.
That sounds like something Jocko, like a perspective that Jocko would have on daily tasks.
Yeah. But I mean, there's so much to that, and I think with age comes wisdom. At least it should. And I reflect on just something so simple like that and think, I get to do everything I get to do every day.
Well, and I think like that classic saying of what is it? If you find a job that you love, you'll never work a day in your life. That whole thing.
Yep.
And I know from the time I was a little bitty to growing up, you've always maintained that being a fireman is a job that you wake up and you look forward to going to work.
Yep.
So I feel like, like you said, you're not a millionaire, super wealthy or anything, but as far as career goals in life, like you hit the jackpot just as big as anybody could. And yeah, now you're just trying to make sure your kids all grow up to be decent human beings.
Yep. That's all you can do.
It's an ongoing process.
It is, especially when you got more in the house and trying to lead down the right path of. And success is all in the eye of the beholder. I mean, you could be not picking on the garbage men out there, but you could be a guy that works for Sanford and Sons, and if that's your thing, man, that's your thing. So, I'm one of those advocates of college is a farce in a lot of ways, just because in the sense of what's real in the world and not what's make-believe or what feels good, especially today. I'm not saying there aren't good schools out there, because there certainly are. I think most of these liberal art colleges and all those things are full of shit and are leading our great nation down a dark path because they're producing, through opinions of these professors, some pretty skewed senses of reality.
Well, and I was, it's funny that Jake is now getting to the same point in his life that I'm about to reference of mine. But there was a time where I was leaning, I was on the fence whether or not I wanted to go to an art school or go to the Army, pretty much two polar opposite things as far as the result, the product of a person that they would create. But I ended up going with the Army, and I think something that you said that I think I might have told you this, but that didn't quite resonate with me at the time that does now, especially as I'm looking at Jake. He said from the time that you're born until you become 18, it is your opportunity as a father to develop me as best you can into the man I'm going to become. When you turn 18, you're more or less the person you're going to become. There's nothing more that you can do as a father because that individual is so set in their ways and being stubborn and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to change much. You need a drastic change in your life that will result in a change in who you are as a person.
Yeah.
And the military is the best at doing that.
That's right.
And I was kind of, not that you talked me out of going to college, but you highly encouraged me to go to the military because it is, after you had your opportunity, your 18 years to develop a young man into who he's going to become, there's nothing more you can do. Now, if you would like to develop yourself more into an honorable man, it's the military's job at that point. And that's kind of just, like, I remember you putting it at that. It was like, I can do no more for you. It is up to the military. If you decide to go that route, they will develop you more into the man that you can become.
Yep.
And it didn't make sense then, but it makes sense now. And I'm just really glad you encouraged me to stay away from the art school because, God, I'm terrified to think of what I would have become.
There may have been a disowning at some point.
I probably have like a long beanie hanging off the top of
yeah.
my head and
Dude.
skinny jeans or something.
You should go with something new, set a new fad, like a man bun on just one side of the head.
The version of me that I am now probably would hate the version that I could have become.
Oh, yeah. Well, that goes for any one of us. I mean, we all could have taken a different path, but, stealing from another podcast, of course, the Team Never Quit, with Marcus and Morgan and Melanie Luttrell, something that Marcus says on a regular basis is the first 40 years of a guy's life is him figuring out who they are. It's not until you start getting some life experience and some wisdom do you really figure out through attrition, if you will, of who it is that you actually are. And I love that, and it means so much. So if somebody can gain as much experience through education and through hands-on experience, through whatever means, in that first 40 years, if that's the number you want to put on it, the better off you're going to be, and not just keeping yourself down one path, so to speak, whether it's the military or school. And I think that's where a lot of these kids go wrong these days, is that they're taking all of their substance from one source, and they're treating it as though it's the end all be all. And man, there's a lot more to be learned, because I think any person will admit that not only have they made a lot of mistakes in their life, but that they've read something wrong, or they were just flat out wrong about something or somebody. There's been a lot of times where, because everybody sizes people up, where I've looked at somebody and thought, that guy is a dick. Or there's something, that I won't like about that person that doesn't meet my standards. Not that I'm going to mistreat that person, but just through visuals or body language or whatever, only to find out
carries himself,
how they carry themselves, only to find out whether it's through that initial meeting or through several others that you were very wrong. I've done that a lot, and I still do occasionally. So, I try to make myself better through those experiences, but as long as you're always open to new ideas. But
I think there's, at least for what you can do when you're in your early stages of life, that delicate age of late teens and early 20s. That's kind of one of the big reasons that I decided to go to the military, was because it was the thing that was going to allow me the most life experience at the was highly accelerated rate.
Yeah.
And this is a podcast about you, but it seems like across the board, by the time you were 20, how many countries had you been to? And by the time I was 20, I had been to several countries and experienced different cultures and stuff, just like I know you had.
Yeah.
Like, if you just go to your community college up the road, you're surrounded by the same people you've always been around, taking in the same information off of whatever screen it is that you're looking at, and you're not expanding your life experiences and opening your mind up to other cultures and stuff.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's a lot to be said for that. And
well, and it's all about, a lot of it's self-interest, but a lot of it's about serving others. And speaking of the Army, I know that was drilled into us early on, because being a field artilleryman, that was drilled into us day one, that you have joined a branch of the Army that is not about you in any way, shape, or form. The service we provide is for our brethren, whether it be the infantry, whether it be the cav, whether it be the armor. Somebody's asking for our help. So when you hear those words, fire mission, you better have your shit wired tight. So, and that was the thing. Whenever we heard fire mission, it wasn't quickly followed with, hey, the infantry's needing some help, or the armor is asking for a little bit of, HE downrange. We didn't know. It might have been a forward observer just pinning targets and nobody was in danger, or it could have been a bunch of grunts like yourself that are pinned down and taking an ass whipping. So we treated everything the same, and it was always about, getting rounds down range, and all that stuff I think has evolved into, even in the fire service. It's not about me. It's about providing the best service to those that are out there that have, through their own life experiences, gone down their checklist while trying to problem solve and hit a dead end. And fortunately for them, they live in this great country that has this thing called 911, or much like calling for fire when you need it. There's a lot of places that don't have it. There's a lot of maybe armies out there that, and I'm sure it's happened in our own wars, where somebody's needed fire support and everybody's wrapped up. They're busy. And it's just you. And, we tell ourselves that all the time in the fire department is, ain't nobody else coming. We got to fix this shit ourselves. So, I don't know. That's kind of encompassed my life, and I'd like to think I'm still learning. So, it's all that stuff.
All right, well, we'll close it up with, what kind of legacy would you like to leave? And then if we were to assume that maybe one of our descendants stumbles upon this one day, what kind of message would you like to leave them about what it means, in your opinion, to be not only an honorable person, but specifically a Gillespie, since it pertains directly to the both of us?
As far as the legacy part goes, I think it would just be to be a good person, and don't, even though I kind of mentioned sizing somebody up and you're kind of judgmental in that sense, but not treat everybody the same. Treat everybody like you want to be treated. Race, religion, color, creed, all that means nothing, especially in the world we live in now. I mean, you're going to have your idiots, your ignorant people out there, and just stay away from them and try to teach. You get to a point to where you should teach those around you, whether it's your own kids or even those that would be willing to listen. Teach them the lessons you've learned so they may not have to repeat it, even though there is a great value to making your own mistakes, no doubt. But
I think we're good at that.
Yeah.
Side note, I think there's some stubbornness. Maybe we got it from grandma or something, but
yeah,
that I feel like for me it was like you told me things and I would just say no, and then I would go through the struggle and then experience the learning the lesson the hard way, and then come out on the other side being like, I should have just did what you said the first time.
But there's more value to you having gone through it yourself. Now I can just say I told you so.
Well, now now it's like, I'm trying to do the same thing with Jake. Like, look, man, I'm a few years ahead of you. I'm trying to give you the answers to the test here.
Oh yeah.
And then he's just like, I feel like a lot of times
thanks.
he's like, yeah, all right, whatever. Like, dude, I'm trying to save you of going through the hard lesson that I had to go through. But then I just think, like, man, if that was me telling me that at that age, I would have done the same thing. I would have just blown me off and been like, yeah.
Well, it's so easy to look back though, and wish you would have done things differently. It's so much harder to look ahead and try to figure out what is actually ahead. Nobody really knows. So yeah, it must be a DNA thing because I didn't listen. You didn't listen. He ain't listening. So we've got to learn all that stuff firsthand. And you know what? So be it. Let it roll.
We all get to laugh about it later.
That's right. Yeah.
Sitting around having beers and stuff. If there was one of our descendants and they stumbled upon this and they wanted to know from great grandpa Gillespie, what advice you'd have for them on being a good person, and I think you kind of already touched on that, but being an honorable person and being a Gillespie, what that means to you.
Mm-hmm. I think it could mean several things. I mean, a lot of it depends, I think, on the time in which you live. And one thing I heard a professor say one time is, if you're a true student of history, some people don't care to be, but some people are quick to judge those in the past without being a history student. But if you really want to appreciate the time, a certain particular time period, don't cast judgment according to the standards in which you live in today. And not to say that people in the past didn't do things wrong, but then again, what are we judging them by? You're judging them by the time in which you are currently living. So I'm sure there's, in this supposed age of enlightenment that we live in, which really cracks me up, and suddenly we think we've got it all figured out as a generation or a culture. I promise you, there will be a time when people are looking back on the year 2020 and going, what in the name of God were these people thinking? So, maybe I got it all wrong. I don't know, but what it means to be a Gillespie in 2020 is a lot of what I think I've already mentioned. Just being honorable, doing the right thing, working hard. Don't ever turn your back on people because there are the fakers, but people that truly need help. If you can make a difference, make the difference, and treating your fellow man with everything that you've got. The positive side. But family is everything. Family is what everybody has at the end of the day, and I hope that most people have the experience that we've had with family, because we're fortunate in that we have a very large, loving family that I think those things are passed on by certain people, and in our lives, in our world, it was in large part your grandmother. There were others, and still are others, your aunts and uncles, to name a few, but somebody's got to take that role, because we're all going to come and go. So I think we all have a responsibility in some regards to be willing to step up to that plate, even though we may not be filling as big of a frame as your grandma did. At least being a picture or a person in that frame, and passing on these things, and having the reunions, and having the get-togethers, and the hugs, and not being so full of yourself to where you can't get past things that really are minuscule at the end of the day. But holding on to that, and being proud of where you came from. We're into the Gillespie thing because we just happen to be ones that are into it. There's obviously been generations of Gillespies that didn't really care what that name meant or where it came from. The fact that it's a Celtic name and that it has origins in Scotland and Ireland and all those things. We've kind of dug deeper into that aspect of it, but to me it just means honorable, remaining honorable, and what that word means, honor. That's something that's just not passed on or taught today like it used to be, because it used to mean so much. That's what was great about early America. When you challenged someone's honor, that could even lead to like duels and shit. I mean, it was serious business. And today you talk about honor. Some people, it still strikes that chord, but it's very, very few compared to what it once was. And I think that's one of the great things about America. One of the things that has made us a great country is everything has always come down to that. We're honorable. We treat everybody. We've made our mistakes, there's no doubt. We're still paying for them today in a lot of ways, but just throw out the Nuremberg trials, for instance. That's one little example of everybody's got a place on this world stage, and we got to treat each other with respect, or you're gonna pay for it one way or another, whether it's in this life or another one. I think that ultimately everybody's got to answer for wrongdoings against each other as people. But work hard. Don't be a lazy ass. Go learn stuff. Go see stuff. Go do stuff that's challenge yourself. Don't get too comfortable to where you're. And that's hard to do because that's a human thing. We always want our comfort place, our comfort zone, but we should always be setting goals and challenging ourselves, doing things that's kind of scary. If you're not really doing scary stuff, and that can be a broad topic too, but you're not really living life the way it's supposed to be lived.
Yeah, might be something that we have to talk about on another episode.
Yeah.
Since we're down to like 10% or whatever.
Yeah. But other than that,
just be a good person.
Just be as good of a person, and that's right. Because you may have been raised by different people with different standards, but I think everybody as a person, as a human, we're all given God-given or naturally given instincts that most people can tell right from wrong, regardless of the way they were brought up. And every person takes their own path willingly, just like enlisting. How many times were you reminded of that you were a volunteer?
You did this to yourself.
You did this to yourself. That's right. God, we were constantly reminded of that. We haven't drafted anybody since 1974 or whatever it was, 75.
Yeah. You did this to yourself. All right, well, I don't want the battery to run out. It just cuts off or anything, so I guess we'll end it there. And I have a spider climbing on my phone.
Awesome. He's probably been sitting there right over the camera the whole time.
Yeah. But, all right, well, that's episode 2 of the Veteran to Veteran podcast. I'll go back and make an intro and everything for this later, but I don't know. Share, comment, like, subscribe, all that cool stuff. Yeah, thanks for being guest number 2. I know you're supposed to be the number 1, but
it's all right. Caleb is pretty freaking cool. I'll surrender.
He's gonna call me about that too.
I would have made him number 1. So
yeah, he likes it. You like him more than you like me at this point.
I'm gonna start a Caleb fan club. So, he's a stud. We're lucky to have guys like that, and you.
Yeah. So go check out episode 1 if you haven't seen it.
That's right. Of course, I got to give, somebody else kudos to, a nameless person that dons the very prestigious Green Beret. But yeah, he knows who I'm talking about.
Yeah, he'll be on.
Yeah.
He'll be on. They just got to get back from their vacation first.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's it. So,
all right, man.
Cut it off here.
Love you.
Love you.